I want to welcome you to the second of our Lenten programs, and we just, again, the topic, of course, is the Underground Railroad here in Geneseo and the abolitionist movement. Also, tonight, Angie Snook, who's the curator of the museum here in Geneseo, will be our speaker, and actually you'll be leading the next few sessions with us. And then Dr. Mulder from Knox College will be making the last presentation. And as always, we're going to have refreshments downstairs in Fellowship Hall, and we have just tons of cookies and snacks. So please, after the presentation, make your way down into the Fellowship Hall for some refreshments and great fellowship. And again, I want to thank you for coming as we celebrate our 175th anniversary as a church and as a city. Thank you.
I have a twin sister, and if there had only been one of us, I might be tall enough to stand up here without having to have a bench. I won't tell her that, but she is 4 inches taller than I am. There's not a better time or place for me to get to speak the next 3 weeks than this year, our 175th anniversary of the Underground Railroad, or in this church, which is our Founding Fathers Church, and something that I'm very passionate about and have spent since 1996 doing lots of research on. It's something I feel very strongly from my heart, and tonight we're going to talk about two of our founders that are some of the most important abolitionists in the United States. They're in the top 70. In fact, in Geneseo, there are top 2, and in the state of Illinois, James Allen was number 1. I'm going to tell you a little bit first about the strong anti-slavery element in Geneseo, the Underground Railroad. And many times they were half-starved, half-dressed, and very poor runaway people being sheltered in our attics and in our basements and in our barns at night. Elijah Stewart, who our Stewart Street is named after, he was one of our instrumental people, as well as Roderick R. Stewart, the Moranvilles, the John C. Wards, William Allen, Alfred Perry, and later the following year, the Hubbards, Hiram Cady, William Miller, Abram Miller, the Gilmores, Royal Wilcox, S.R. Bacon, George Richards, and the Reverend Jairus Wilcox, and the Jason Chapin, the father of the worldly librarian who taught here until her death. Let us cherish and revere the memories of those who builded better than they knew, and that's what our founding fathers said. That's not correct English, but I think it means exactly what they wanted us to know. There were many black codes in the state of Illinois and in the United States. And in 1848, Article 14 of the state constitution was passed prohibiting free persons of color from immigrating to Illinois and prevented slaveholders from bringing slaves into the state for the purpose of setting them free. That means our people were not only breaking the laws of the church, they were breaking the laws of the state of Illinois. I'm first going to tell you a little bit about James Allen, and I have a little bit of information about his family. His father and mother were the owners of slaves and living in a rich pro-slavery district of the country. They were anxious that their children should be industrious and learn how to work hard. Their slaves were treated with great leniency and were comfortably fed, clothed, and housed, but they still were slaves. Their sons, William T. and James M., were encouraged to go north to school, and the consequences of the early teaching at the home and the associations at the north were easily led them to believe that slavery was a curse to both blacks and whites. This was rather more than their father could stand for. Brother William was licensed to preach and spent several years lecturing on slavery. The writer hereof went home in the summer of 1835, which is James Allen, to Huntsville, Alabama, thoroughly impregnated with the anti-slavery notions. I was looked upon by the proud aristocratic people of the section as an alien. My visit home on the account was not most agreeable. At that time, before reaching 21 years of age, I was fully convinced that such a condition of things could not always exist in the South, that sooner or later, the unnatural and violent relations existing between black and white would produce a terrible disaster in some shape or form. At that time, he decided he needed to come to the state of Illinois because it was progressing in the anti-slavery move. He bound onto a boat in Tuscumbia and landed at Paducah, Kentucky, I can say that one, at the mouth of the Tennessee River. I went to Carrollton, Illinois. Then I found the horse that I had left there previously, whose name was Davy Crockett, and made my way to Henry County to the Brandenburg Inn. This is all from his autobiography, and we're very privileged to have his autobiography at the Geneseo Historical Museum. And I'm just choosing some highlights from it to share with you tonight. His father was a preacher, a Presbyterian preacher, and also a teacher. So James Allen's father, John Allen, had completely different beliefs than John or his son William. For 22 years, he taught his sons that slavery was okay. And when he was teaching in his classroom, he also noted slavery is okay. It's to be wanted. It's good. James Allen arrived in Henry County in 1835. He was born 11/23/1814. He died 12/20 of 1885. He did lots of many things in our county, and if any of you ever used to listen to my radio show on Channel 50, we used to kind of make, Kurt Ford and Keith Kennett and I sometimes made fun of Major Allen because he had his nose in everything. No matter what was going on in Geneseo or Henry County, he was a part of it. Well, he was a good leader, and I have to make amends for some of the things I said. He was a leader in Henry County government, a first county clerk and the first county judge. He was voted into the state legislature in Vandalia when it was the state capital. March of 1837, he was chosen major of Henry County Battalion, commissioned by Governor Duncan. Later, he was county deputy, and then he was also the head of the circuit court in Springfield. He went back and forth between here and Springfield by horseback. He also became the first postmaster of Geneseo. In 1850, he sent to the state legislature and went and was most persistent about for getting the charter for the Chicago Rock Island lines. And this was for a very meaningful purpose. We thought, oh, isn't it wonderful? The real railroad is going to come through Geneseo. But Major Allen had already set his sights on that railroad, was going to solicit people to come here on the Underground Railroad, and they would have a much better means to transport the slaves to Chicago. Now, at this time, they were coming from the south. They were going through Galesburg, as Monica had told us last week. Andover was also part of the Underground Railroad, a few homes there. There were also some in Cambridge. There was also one stop in the Wethersfield area, but Geneseo was the #1 main hub. And when they got to Geneseo in the Cones edition and all our founders, they were #1. They all came here for one purpose, and that was as abolitionists to free the slaves. In this church, you will see by this summer, because I just found out there's a case that was purchased, the original covenant from 1829 to 1835 will be on display in this church by this summer. So you'll be able to read copies of it. You won't get to touch the real one, but you'll be able to see the covenants and how strongly these people believed in the Anti-Slavery Act. Most of the time, they went from home to home in Geneseo. There were many homes on the Underground Railroad. And Major Allen knew that we were getting close to having slaves caught in our community. So he went back to New York several times to try to secure funds to start the Chicago Rock Island line. And then he went to the state of Illinois legislature, and he petitioned them also to try to get the Chicago Rock Island lines. Now, how many of you remember when the Chicago Rock Island lines came through? Yeah. 1854, we had the railroad come through here. So he was very instrumental in two ways of getting people to Chicago by means of the Underground Railroad. Later, he became known as the father of the Hennepin Canal. He was also a scholar and a schemer at this movement, and he also wanted a waterway. He spent several winters in Washington, D.C., urging the legislature on its behalf. And he felt it was very important that we not only have a railroad system, but a waterway system. Now, as we learn later on, that the Hennepin Canal did not come through here until 1906 and 1907. So by that time, it was not of use of the Underground Railroad, and it was a very little use also of transporting goods from one side to the Mississippi River up to the Great Lakes as well. In 1839, he married a young woman, Susanna Stewart. And Susanna Stewart was Roderick R. Stewart's daughter. And they had 4 daughters. And the 4 daughters were also very much a part of the Underground Railroad. They secured clothing, they secured food, they secured medications. They were part of the Underground that was very important. The women of this church often cared for the people who got here. And by the time the slaves would arrive from the South, many of their feet would be torn. They would have soles of their feet ripped apart from traveling the riverbeds and the woods at night. So by the time they got here, it was up to these young women to soak their feet in warm water. They would take salve and rub into the wounds. They would cut strips of wool, only about this wide, and they would wrap their feet over and over again until it almost made like a boot. Now, I can't imagine putting wool onto the soles of my shoes when I have blisters and wounds, but the salve that they penetrated onto their feet penetrated into that wool, and in time, those became shoes for our slaves as they traveled on to the next free house. Later, we're going to talk about his youngest daughter, Sarah. And Sarah went on with Mary Ward, and that's next time's program. They became teachers in the South. And our slave children, who were now free, were going to be educated by the American Church Society. So these 2 young women from this church in 1900 and 1901 went to the South to teach these children. And I think you're going to find very interesting their firsthand stories, their first knowledge, they're all the truth, what they endured while they were in the South. And they also had endured working with the Ku Klux Klan. So that's just a little insight for next time. Also, James started the town of Richmond. Anybody know where Richmond is? Yay, we got a couple hands. Okay. Richmond is our first county seat. It's between Geneseo and Cambridge. If you go down 92 towards Cambridge, you'll see 2 rocks. One of them is the Great Sauk Trail. The other is Richmond. And he started his community there and the first county seat. But he also thought it was a good haven to help people getting from the Cambridge area over to the Geneseo area. Well, unfortunately, Richmond burnt. So the county seat at that time was then changed to Morristown, and then later in 1843 transferred to Cambridge. But he was always on the move, in the courts, in the legislature, fighting for our Underground Railroad and that all people would be created equal. He didn't feel that there should be a differentiation between the blacks and the whites. I want to read you a story because this is how determined he was. It also tells the fate of a good horse, Davy Crockett. Remember I told you he left his horse down in Carrollton, Illinois, and he picked it up back there and brought it here to Geneseo, to the Brandenburg with him? It tells the fate of his good horse, Davy Crockett. And he had first carried him from Alabama to Illinois. In December of 1837, I had an occasion to go to the land office in Galena. This time I rode Davy Crockett, a fine traveler, as I left the Brandenburg Inn through Prophetstown to the home of Robert Young, who lived on a farm which is now north of Morristown, which was then in Whiteside County. The weather was very cold, and the next morning, Mr. Young advised me 3 times, please do not leave my house. He said that the streams were high and the recent rains, that the bridges were probably gone in some places, and the mercury was way below zero. The wind from the northwest, and had the ride facing into it. But I had a sense, even though it takes to take his good advice, but after starting to go, I never yet stopped for wind or anything else. I found the wind tedious and very cold. 10 miles from Mr. Young's, I came to Johnson's Creek, a stream not over 10 or 12 feet wide. It was swollen and the bridge was gone. The bank seemed perpendicular. I rode up and down, hunting for a place to cross. Finally, I decided to get the horse in where the bridge had formerly forged the place. Davy refused for some time to go in, and finally I spurred him, and in he went, just like going off the roof of a house. I calculated to guide him by slapping him on the side of the head, the place where it had been the custom to go out when forging the stream. But it was upstream, and there was ice in the way, and the current was stronger than I had expected. So Davy turned downstream. I guided him very soon to a place where I jumped my feet on his back and then to the bank. Davy Crockett returned around and swam to me. He got his 4 feet up on the bank, and I got hold of his bridle by the bit and made a desperate effort to help him out. But his hind feet did not touch the bottom. I pulled off my mittens while helping him, and 2 of my fingers were frozen white. Wherever a drop of water touched, the skin was instantly frozen. I was wet to the waist, and my clothing was stiff as ice. It was then probably not more than 2 minutes since jumping into the stream. It was a dangerous place to stay. I knew my life was at stake. I left suddenly and ran 1 mile to the house. I made quick time. I was soon thawed out and comfortable beside a good fire. The man and his son went down to the stream to see if they could find my horse, Davy Crockett, but returned and said they could not find him. I always doubted their going to the stream at all. The wind was fairly cold and the mercury still below zero. The next morning was very cold, but then there was no wind. I went out on foot to Galena and returned on foot to the same house. The men had been down to the creek the morning I left for Galena and found Davy Crockett in the middle of the stream and his head resting over a log, frozen stiff, of course. I was to blame. I had been too headstrong again. Mr. Young had given me good advice, but I learned that fact by hard experience. I risked my own life and lost a splendid horse. I wrote to my father living in Huntsville, Alabama, and told him all the facts. His reply mentioned the fact that the horse's refusing 3 times to go into the stream, and said that if the rider had been as sensible as the horse, Davy Crockett would still be alive too. I love the story because I think it tells us the determination that James Allen had throughout his whole life, not just for the Underground Railroad, but that was part of him. Then he also went afterwards back to Springfield, and he wanted others to consult him in building a railroad that would go from Galesburg to Geneseo and to Morrison to also help support the Underground Railroad. Of course, we know it never happened. When he was a boy and he was in school, his teacher called him a dullard, and it bothered him very, very much. And he said it really hurt his confidence and it hurt his expectations to accomplish very much. And he said, if I learned anything, I learned not to judge other people. And he said, I feel all people should be taught that they should have hope to try and to persevere. Bright scholars in school don't always prove most successful in business or the professions, but some children mature earlier than others. Some need pushing forward and some need holding back. Teachers seem generally to expect every child to toe the mark. They contract a habit of paying special attention to the bright ones, becoming prejudiced against the dull ones. Their duty is to give special attention to the dullest. Some of them will unlikely become the smartest. I like his attitude. I was a teacher for 22 years. From there, I'm going to move on to his dear brother, William T. Allen. James Allen was here a number of years before William T. Allen came. He also was a Presbyterian pastor, and as Monica told us last week, he played a very important role in getting our people here to Geneseo. He went out into the woods, into the small towns, into Bergen and Geneseo County, New York, and he found the people and asked them to please join his cause as an abolitionist. They did decide in 1829 that they were going to come here, and it took them until 1836 to start to make the move. They all came here with the goals of anti-slavery, and those are our founding people. I want to read a little bit about from his background about why the Allen brothers were so determined to become abolitionists. Then I will go back a little bit more on William T. Allen. It said, my brother also stated to me the following, which occurred near my father's house. And this is James Allen talking about the slaves near where his family farm was. And by this time, James Allen was living in Richmond, Henry County, Illinois. My brother also stated to me the following, which occurred near my father's home, and with sight and hearing of the Academy of Public Garden. Charles, a fine, active Negro, who belonged to a bricklayer in Huntsville, exchanged the burning sun of the brickyard to enjoy for a season the pleasant shade of an adjacent mountain. When his master got him back, he tied him by his hands so that his feet would just barely touch the ground. He stripped off all his clothing, took a paddle, bored full of holes, and paddled him leisurely all day long. It was 2 weeks before they could tell whether he would live or die. Neither of these cases attracted any particular notice in Huntsville, Alabama. Mrs. Barr, wife of the Reverend H. Barr of Carlton, Illinois, formerly of Cortland, Alabama, told me last spring that she has very often stopped her ears from hearing, that she might not hear the screams of slaves who were under the lash, and that sometimes she left her house and retired to another place distant away in order to get away from their agonizing cries. I have often seen groups of slaves on the public squares in Huntsville where we were sold at auction, and I have often seen their tears gush forth and their countenance distorted with anguish, seeing their brothers, their sisters, their loved ones all shipped away. Legal marriage is unknown among the slaves. They sometimes have a marriage form. Generally, however, they have none at all. The pastor of the Presbyterian Church in Huntsville, which we know who that is, John, their father, had 2 families of slaves when I left home. One couple were married by a Negro preacher. The man was robbed of his wife a number of months later afterwards by her owner. The other couple just took up together without any form of marriage. They are both members of the churches, the man a Baptist deacon, sober and correct in his deportment. They have a large family of children, all children of their concubine, living in the minister's family. If those statements are deemed of any value by you in forwarding your glorious enterprise, you are at liberty to use them as you please. The wrong of enslaving man, all the other wrongs are pygmies compared to that. Facts might be gathered abundantly to show that it is slavery itself and not the cruelties merely that make slaves unhappy. Even those who are most kindly treated are generally far from being happy. The slaves in my father's family are almost as kindly treated as slaves can be, but yet they pant for liberty. William Allen says in his last statement, "May the Lord guide you in this great movement. In behalf of the perishing, your friend and brother, William T. Allen." I'm sorry, I get really emotional over this. I don't know what would have happened if we would not have had these 2 men with their strong beliefs. When I talk to my grandchildren, I often tell them, you know, your mom and dad get real mad at you. These two brothers had to stand up to their parents. They had to stand up to the laws of government. They had to stand up to the rules of their church. Today, our parents probably think, oh, I hope my kids don't go out and get drunk on Saturday night. I hope my daughter doesn't end up pregnant. I hope my kids finish school. I hope they go to college. I hope they don't get in a car accident. And those are all major, major, major concerns. We all have those concerns. But can you imagine the mother and father who believed in servitude had two sons that took on the cause of anti-slavery? Now, I have to tell you, their mother did not care for the slavery acts of Alabama, but because she was a wife in a different time and place, she had very little that she could say about it. And she was the only one, when their sons would go back there, that would acknowledge them and acknowledge their beliefs. She also worked on their dad and said, you know, our two sons, they went out east. They were part of the Yale movement. They declared what they believed in. And when they come back here, you need to talk to them because they have sacrificed a lot for what they feel so strongly in their hearts. Well, William Allen came back here and rarely returned to his father's until the very end. He became a friend of the Lovejoy brothers in Princeton, Illinois. He went from one end of the state of Illinois to the other, preaching about anti-slavery movement. He went to Peoria. He finally bought a brand new suit because most of the time he didn't have the nicest clothes in the world. The first time he put this suit on, he got bombarded by tomatoes and potatoes and his suit was wrecked. Well, that wasn't too bad, although he was very upset about it. He went down to the Tremont area of Illinois, was giving a talk, and he was nearly killed. So he took his chances, and if you all remember, one of the Lovejoy brothers was murdered in the St. Louis area. But because of their strong beliefs, they continued on. He also was part of the first anti-slavery newspaper in Chicago called the Western Cities, and he was part of that movement as early as July 13th, 1844. Today, if you walk across the street, you will see William T. Allen's house. Now, last week, Monica told us about the Chapin coming here, and he was one of our pastors. He was one of the strong believers. He was also one of the top 70. Well, Mr. Chapin's wife passed away, so William T. Allen married his wife and raised his children. He married her in 1846. In 1855, he went to the state legislature of Illinois. Now remember, his brother James is also part of that legislature, and he drafted a petition to the Senate and state representatives of the state of Illinois. And it goes as follows, and luckily I have a copy of it too. To the Senate and the House of Representatives of the state of Illinois, your petitions, citizens of this county of Henry, would respectfully call the situation of honorable bodies to have laws of this state in regard to Negroes. We consider many of them just, Christian, and that these statutes on the books are wearing and are permanent laws. Our petition is that you repeal all these statutes, which makes it distinctive between men because of the color of their skin. As in duty bound, we shall pray. All our founding fathers in Geneseo and in Henry County signed this petition. I better get a drink. William T. Allen became the village clerk from 1855 to 1859. He preached in this church when Reverend Wilcox went out east to get Jason Chapin and also Addison Lyman. For 6 to 8 months, our William T. Allen preached here in this church. And then later, in 1848, C.S. Cady came here. So I've got some stories about him next week, too. Both of the Allen brothers rank in the top 70 fighting for anti-slavery. Together they convinced their father that slavery was wrong and he needed to release his slaves. They were not afraid to stand up for what they believed in. They defied their parents, the laws of the land, and their church, and they were dedicated their lives to stop slavery. I want to read to you the transcript of the last will and testament of John Allen, Huntsville, Alabama. In the name of God, amen. I, John Allen, the minister of the gospel of Huntsville, Alabama, do this day, the 17th of the year of the Lord, 1843, make and declare this my last will and testament in a manner that follows. First, I resign my soul into the hands of Almighty God, hoping and believing in the remission of my sins by the merit and meditation of Jesus Christ, and my body I commit to the earth. I also give and devise to my son James the tract of land on which he now lives in Henry County, Illinois. Also I give and devise to my son William an 80-acre tract of land he may select of my lands in Henry County, Illinois, excepting that on which my son James lives. This bequest is made on the condition that my son William lives on the tract selected. If, however, he does not think it's proper to live on any of that land, then it shall all be sold in the discretion of my executor, and the proceeds shall be equally divided all of my children. And they did purchase all this land, all the way what we consider clear down past Chicago Street. Mabel, you should help me out on these documents. The best part of all, it is also my will that my Negroes shall be set free and sent to Liberia. I desire my executor to hire them out until sufficient monies shall be raised to pay for their passage and furnish the necessary outfit. It is my will that Cato and Robert and Sally be sent out first for the passage and outfit of the latter. I wish my executor to appropriate a sufficient sum out of the monies due me at the decrease, as I do not wish her to be hired out. I'm sorry, I have to go back here. My executor to appropriate a sufficient sum out of the monies due me at my decrease, as I do not wish her to be hired out, unless it should be to my son-in-law, Louis Wyeth, in the care of his wife. I especially commit Sally until she can be sent back to Africa. With regards to my servant Richmond, it is all my will that he be left on his own choice whether to stay here or to go. If he prefers the former first, avails of his labor in a portion to his support, he is not to be sold under any conditions. It is my will that Dolly shall be set free and sent to Liberia, as she is married and has some difficulties and may attend this. I must leave it up to her discretion and up to my executor. It is an indispensable condition of my setting of slaves free that they should all be sent to Africa, though I greatly prefer this because I am fully persuaded it is, in general, the very best thing. So finally, in the end, he joined his sons as an abolitionist. At the time of John Allen's death in 1843, his slaves could not be set free in the state of Alabama. So his sons brought 10 to 12 of them back here and got them to freedom. Old Richmond became James Allen's personal friend and personal person in his home. And he lived here until he was nearly 70 years old. And as a slave, he did not have a name, and Old Richmond was given his name by James' father, John, because of John buying the property for James, which he named Richmond, which is kind of hard to get across. So Richmond came here named after a city. He only had one name. He had no birth date. He had no family. And at the very end, it says, Old Richmond was a kind and good soul. He was buried in North Cemetery. He was there 102 years. He was the first person buried in North Cemetery. He lay in his grave for 102 years, and Louise Bradley, which was the great-granddaughter of James Allen, in 1974 put a stone on that grave, and it says, Old Richmond, first freed slave of James Allen, and today you can go visit that. I get quite emotional over this. It's very important to me. And I always think of what it was like to sit here in this church, to sit here in this town, to have meetings and know that what was going on in your barns and in your basements and in your attics and in your hiding holes. And I often think, how do people have so much hope when every day they live in so much fear? Next week, we will going a step further. We will be talking about Harriet Cone Miller. And the Cone's Edition is just to the south of Main Street on the other side of the city park. Elijah and Alicia Cone were conductors also of the Underground Railroad. I live in a house from 1854, which I know is also part of the Underground Railroad, and just a few years ago we were having it replumbed, and we found a hiding hole that's very similar to the one in the museum. And I made my husband tear off some of the new concrete that was at the back of it to see if I could find if there was an entrance, and sure enough, there's a small wooden hole with a door that goes into there. I have no way of proving it, there's no documentation, but I know there's many other homes that will still be found out in Geneseo. Harriet Cone Miller, we're going to do her story. She was a young girl who came here with her parents in 1836, and I have numerous stories to share with you about her. We're also going to talk about Sarah Allen, James' daughter, and Mary Ward, the first teachers who went through the American Missionary Association and the Ku Klux Klan. And we're also going to discuss Joanna and Philip Montgomery, Darlene Holland's great-great-grandparents, who were the first freed black slaves brought to Geneseo by John Hammond of our Hammond Henry Hospital and Hammond Library. So I thank you for listening to me tonight, and I hope you'll come back, and we'll do another week next week. Thank you. Then I'll fall off.
Do you have any questions for Angie? Anybody have any questions?
Wow. Yes. Shirley Draymond's house was William T. Allen's home. And there was a carriage house behind there where they housed the slaves. James Allen's house is across the street from, I always call it Conoco, I think it's Shell now. Was on that corner, was his first home. And then he moved to where the Hammond Henry Hospital is today, was his second home on North College Avenue, and where our first Hammond Henry Hospital was. That house burnt, but then the second house, which became part of the Normal Academy in Geneseo, became the Hammond Hospital in 1901. So they had lots of large houses. The Perrys also have the house that Jay and Judy Hansen have, and we're working on a little thing for our third week of this, so we'll tell you more about that next week. Any other questions?
I was just wondering if there were people who owned slaves. Did they ever come through here looking for their slaves?
We do not know exactly, but we have stories that were told. The museum, which is part of the Underground Railroads, Mr. Richards had written a story that there were people on his boarding house, which is not where the Cellar restaurant is. Everybody thinks it's where the Cellar is. It's the parking lot behind it. And he had a boarding house there. And he said there were people sitting on his front porch watching the house. And in the hiding hole, he had two slaves, and they had been in there for 2.5 days with no food, no bathroom, no water, which makes it a matter of life and death. So he thought he needed to get those two slaves out of there. So he went and told his wife, you get your best mourning clothes, and we're going to dress up these slaves. So he dressed up the two slaves as two women in mourning. He put one on one arm, one on the other, walked them past the boardwalk, right where the men were watching them, took them to the carriage house, put them in a carriage, and drove them by, and they never knew those were the two slaves in the basement. Yes. And then next week I'm going to tell you about Harriet Combe Miller's story, and it's one of my favorites. I won't let out all the details now, and some of you may have heard it before when I did Heritage Days, but it's so good you can hear it again. It's one of my favorites, and one of them that I didn't have documented until just a few years ago, and it was just by divine intervention that it became documented. So that's what's most important. The things that we are telling you between Monica, myself, Owen Mulder, all these are documented. They are truth. It wasn't by chance that Geneseo came here. It was by the grace of God and the people who met William T. Allen and James Allen and said, okay, this is what we're going to do. Any other questions?
Yes, so this family of Presbyterians in general.
Well, I went to the National Underground Railroad Museum in Maysville, Kentucky to do research last fall. And the young woman there who is the assistant curator, Crystal Marshall, she has been a Congregationalist, she's been a Baptist, and she's been a Presbyterian, and she can't find out any of the answers, so I don't know. I figure if she doesn't know, as this beautiful African-American woman, and her mother is the curator, I'm probably not going to find out. I wish I had the answer. Anybody else?
What was the question, Angie?
Was it just the Presbyterians, or was it just was there a whole group that were working together?
Yes.
And as far as there were Baptists, there were Congregationalists, there were Presbyterians, there were Methodists. All these people in the East were working to get back here, to get the abolitionists to the South, to break up the slavery trade that was going on. But Monica last week, I think, said the same thing, and there was a lot of argument between all the different scholars, which ones were going to manifest this, and there were different thoughts of how you go about this. A lot of them had the same idea and the same principles, but they just went around it in a different religious way, just because of their backgrounds.
But, you know, Quakers have a reputation for being soft ambitious. I mean, I just heard Presbyterians being soft.
Well, we have to say, when they came here, we had Congregationalists, Presbyterians, and one Methodist.
But, you know, they broke off from, our folks broke off from their larger denomination to create this church.
Yes.
And that's what was going on. It was like-minded people who were breaking up, and they were called abolitionist churches. So maybe Angie's a congregation. Well, I got to make you a Presbyterian, because Congregationalists were like, but Presbyterians in the North, who were New School Presbyterians, were anti-slavery.
Yes.
Presbyterians in the South, or Old School Presbyterians, were pro-slavery.
Yes.
So when you say that you're confused, you legitimately get to be confused, because it depended where you lived. Slavery broke up the Methodist Church, the Presbyterian Church, the Baptist Church, because the Baptist Church just breaks up anyway, because that's what they're congregational polities. But for sure, the Methodist Church split over this, and there became a Methodist Church South and a Methodist Church, Episcopal Methodist Church, and then the Presbyterian split. And that's why the Congregationalists eventually split here in town over that national argument. Over that national argument.
Yeah. It's really hard to explain, yes.
Now, to address your question about the Quakers are known for being anti-slavery, I'm from the East, my family are Quakers, and I just wonder, I don't know the answer, but I'm supposing here, was it because the Quakers were mostly on the East Coast, and that was where their stronghold was, that's where you got the relationship between the anti-slavery movement and the Quakers, and were there as many Quakers here as there were on the coast? And it just may be a regional thing. Whereas here it might have been mostly the Congregational or the Presbyterian or whatever, that were in the Underground Railroad and anti-slavery, whereas on the East Coast, you had a heavier Quaker population. And I don't know if that's the answer, but that would be my best guess.
Well, I was just noticing that, you know, say John Brown was in Kansas, in Iowa, and in those states, and so it seems as though Quakers were sending out missionaries.
Well, and even in William T. Allen's, his autobiography, he talks about John Brown and meeting John Brown. And I couldn't get into all of it because we'd be here for 3 days. But I want to tell you that, maybe I'll do this up here so everybody can hear it. And I won't fall off. And I'll keep it short. I was doing a program in Chillicothe, Illinois. I had given the program through the University of Illinois the first time in 2004. And I was invited back through Bradley University to give it a second time on our Underground Railroad. And as I was down there, I was eating at the Pizza Hut next door, and a truck came in with a Confederate flag in the back, and I really didn't think too much about it. Monica's heard this story before. And I went into the Historical Society in Chillicothe and started to give my program on the Underground Railroad. And 2 men that were in there started arguing with me, and they finally said, "It's people like you who ruined everything for us." And they still had very bitter, angry feelings. The man that was a professor at Bradley ended up calling the police. 1 man left on his own accord. The second one had to be escorted out. And it was the first time I realized there's some very strong feelings even today. On our trip to the South, which we're going back in October, and doing more research at the Underground Railroad Museum and through the Ohio River bottom and through Tennessee and Alabama, I forgot where I was going with this. As we were researching it last fall, I had a gentleman who told my husband as we were talking, he said, "You can tell your wife, the North may have won the fight, but they didn't win the war." So I don't know. I think I'll have to learn how to shoot a gun. No, just kidding. So any other questions? Yes? Yes, there were several close calls in Geneseo. I've read different points of view. One of them said that we did have a couple people caught here. The others have said that there were many close calls, but no one was actually captured. So I'm hoping that's true. Anything else?
So where was the next stop on the
We had 2 routes out of Geneseo, and National Geographic did this for us in 2000. And both of them were going north out of Geneseo to the Rock River. The southern route was to Linden, and then Princeton, and then Chicago, and get on freighters and go into Canada. If it was frozen or frozen so the ships couldn't get through, they would cross the Ohio River bottom because Harriet Tubman had very much paved the way. The northern route, we went out to Geneseo again towards the Rock River, then we went up to Dixon, Rockford, Minneapolis, St. Paul, which was just a territory, and from there they would go into Canada. And in the rafters of the museum, they would take little sticks and burn whatever they were branded with into their arm, leave that symbol, and this might be something you're thinking about too, and they'd leave a sign whether they took the northern route or the southern route, so anyone that followed them on this freedom trail, if they were from the same plantation, they would know which route to take out of Geneseo. I've been asked this many times, do you think they ever found each other? I doubt it, but at least their intentions were good, and you know, we can only hope that maybe a few of them did. Anything else? Well, those are wonderful questions. Thank you.